All right, let's look at question number 5 and see where you made your mistake.
Oh, I did it wrong.
All right, so just take a look at that for a second. Again, I try to trick you on this one by writing it out of order a little bit. But again, remember, the b is the number in front of the x. Is there an x term here? No, that means b is what? That means b is 0. And 0 divided by anything is just what? 0. So does everybody understand now why the axis of symmetry is x equals 0?
Oh, I see what I have wrong. I think
Okay with that?
1 point.
Yeah. Now, once you find x equals 0, you plug that into the equation. And then 9 minus 0 is what? 9. So now the the vertex is 0, 9. Well, the problem here is that the vertex and the y-intercept are both what? 0, 9. Right? So everybody look up now. Make sure you understand why the vertex is 0, 9 and the y-intercept is also 0, 9. Anybody have any questions with that? Okay, so now from there, we don't have a second point. So you have to create a second point. All right, and to create a second point, you're just going to randomly pick a number, which is 1. That would be the easiest one. If you want to do 2, that would be okay. Or plug in 3, that would be okay. But 1 is usually the easiest. So when you plug in 1, what ordered pair do you get? 1, 8. So then you plot the point 1, 8. And then you use the mirror, which is the axis symmetry, to find the other point. Angles, what? Come on. Face the front and join us. All right? So, does anybody have any doubts now about question number 5? Anybody?
Yeah, can you just scroll down to number 6? Because I just want to see the overview of it.
Did we do 6 yesterday, or do you need to look? Or does anybody have any other questions with this now? All good? Okay. Now, what I would like to do is today we're going to talk about solve by completing the square. Solve by completing the square. Now, I was used to tell kids that there are multiple ways to solve a quadratic. Number 1 was yesterday, we just take the what? Square root. That works when there is no x term. All right, it's just x squared. Most of the time, that's not the case, though. All right? Most of the time, there is an x term. All right, so today we're going to solve the equation by completing the squares, which is very useful when you take Algebra 2. All right, if it was up to me, I would probably say it's not necessary, but on some of the standardized tests, the completing the square is super important. There's been emphasis put on completing the square. So that's what we're going to learn today. And then tomorrow, we're going to learn the last way, which is solve by using the quadratic formula. All right, solve by using the quadratic formula, which is not a big deal either. All right, today, however, I always tell kids, this to me wasn't logical. All right, it's something you just have to practice 4 or 5 times. And once you practice 4 or 5 times, it becomes very simple. All right, it becomes very easy. All right, so I want to show you something about question number 2. All right, and I always tell kids I would never make you do something a long way if there was what? A short way to do it. All right, so for question number 2, all I want you to do is just listen to what I'm saying. Hopefully everybody looked at that and said, well, that's really easy because I can just solve that by factoring. Don't write this down. That would be a minus 4 times a plus 2. So the answer is either 4 or what?
-2.
The answer is either 4 or -2. All right? Well, the problem is that they don't always work out to where you can factor them. So they had to come up with a different technique. Everybody with me? All right. So the different technique is called solve by completing the square. So what I want to do now is I'm going to move this over out of the way just so we can remember our answer. And now I'm going to teach you how to solve this by completing the square. Now again, I would not, on a test, if somebody said solve that by completing the square, I wouldn't do that. I would just solve by what? Factoring. Because it's the easiest way to do it. Do I agree? However, I got to show you the technique of solving by completing the square. So we're going to start out with something very what? Easy. And then we'll go into something a little bit harder. All right? So with that, all right, listen now for question number 2. All right? To solve by completing the square, the first thing I need you to do is I need you to move the constant to the other side of the equation. All right? So I would have a squared minus 2a. We leave a space, and then we say equals 8. All right? Now, here is the technique that you use to complete the square. All right? And again, I'll explain in more detail as we go, but this is the technique you're going to use to complete the square. To complete the square, you always take half of b and then square it. All right? You take half of b and square it. So in this case, b was what? -2. So if we take half of that, that becomes -1. And then we squared it, becomes what? 1. So that is equal to 1. That's essentially. Now again, you don't have to write all that down because you can do it mentally, but I'm just showing you the details. So this becomes a +1. So when I do a +1 on the left side, I have to put a +1 on the right side. All right? Now I'm just going to move this out of the way. So now, believe it or not, this is called a perfect square. All right? That is called a perfect square. In other words, I can factor that into whatever the half was. What was the half of -2? So that always factors into a minus 1 squared is equal to what? 9. All right? It always will factor into whatever the half was. All right? By having and squaring it, you make it a perfect square. All right? Now, how do I solve a square? I take the what? Square root. All right? So we write a minus 1 equals, what's the square root of 9? What's the square root of 9 now in this case? Yes, plus or minus 3 because it's in an equation. So plus or minus 3. And now I'm isolating the a, so I do what? Add 1 to both sides. So a is equal to 1 plus or minus 3. Everybody good with this? So now a is equal to, what's 1 plus 3? 4. Or what's 1 minus 3? Or a equals -2. So look back at our original. All right? And look here. Is it the same answer? Did this take us too much time? Yes. All right. Now, for those guys who didn't hear me the first time, I'm showing you this because it's for an advanced technique later on. But right now, I just put some easy ones up just so you could understand how to complete the square. All right. I put very easy ones first. And now it's going to be a little bit harder as we get down to the other problems. All right. But let's take a look now at question number 4. First thing I have to do is move the what? 12. So here we go. K squared plus 8k equals -12. Now you complete the square. To complete the square, it would be what constant? 8 divided by 2 squared. Perfect. And what is that? 16. So it'd be plus 16 plus 16. Now try to listen to me. This always now creates a perfect square. And you don't even have to think about it if you remember that it always factored into whatever the half was. What was half of 8? 4. So it factors into k plus 4 squared equals what? 4. Now if you do that, I do what? Take the square root. I take the square root of both sides, so I have k plus 4 equals plus or minus 2. Thank you for listening. Plus or minus 2. Now I do what? Move the 4 over, right? So k equals negative 4 plus or minus 2. Anybody have any issues?
How did you get k plus 4?
I factored it. Factored into whatever the half was. All right? So now k is equal to, what's negative 4 plus 2? Or k is equal to negative 6. Good job. All right? Now, in a minute, you'll see what I'm saying about why this is important. Because most of the time, your quadratics will not factor. All right? But they still have a solution. If you didn't know a different technique, you wouldn't be able to find the solution. All right? So what I want to do is I want to go down now to question, I want to go down to question 12 for a second. Everybody look at 12. All right? Now, I've got to move 21 where? To the right. So I end up with p squared minus 8p equals what? Negative 15. Now half and square. 4, then squared 16, right? So we'll do plus 16, plus 16. So factors to what? Exactly. So p minus 4 equals, nope, plus or minus 1. So p equals 4 plus or minus 1. So p is equal to, or p equals 3. Everybody good with that? All right. Let me try to find something. I want everybody to go to question number 3. Bless you. Everybody go to question number 3 real quick. All right. Here's where it comes into play. All right. The reason why it comes into play here is because can you factor? Are there any factors of 22 that are 16? No. Is everybody with me? All right. So now we've got to complete the square. You'll see what I mean. All right. So p squared plus 16p equals what? 22. Everybody good with that? Now you take half and square. All right. So that would be plus 64 plus 64. Everybody good with that? Now factors to what? P plus 8 squared equals 86. Everybody see that? Now you take the square root. P plus 8 equals what? What does P plus 8 equal? No. plus or minus square root of
Oh.
86.
Oh.
We always want the exact answer. So now my answer is just P equals, that's the answer. -8 plus or minus the square root of 86. That's the answer. All right, does 86 break down? No, because 2 times 43 is 86, and those are prime. Yes, sir. Of course, there's some tissue right there for you. Sorry.
Oh, and it's super soft.
Yeah, they're really soft.
Mr. Sprouse, everyone call on their iPad with inspection people.
I don't know what that means.
Everyone's getting the face by something. I gave her a high five. Everyone on their iPads during class playing games. They don't go
No,
on.
I honestly, I don't think, listen, I don't think they're here for that. I think they're here just basically checking on curriculum more. All right, making sure that when I say I'm teaching this, they look and see that I'm teaching this.
Not teaching how to hack the iPads and be able
all
to
that
play
other
games.
stuff. All right.
All
All right, number 5. Here we go, guys. So let's take a look at number 5 now. All right, let's see if you got this. All right. So first thing I would say is r squared plus 2r equals 33. Now what? Half the square plus 1. So that breaks down to a bit after that. Any questions? So now what? R plus 1 equals R plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 34. Everybody agreeing with me?
You don't solve it at all.
And then the final answer, R equals what? Yes, -1. Just traditionally, that's a good question. Just traditionally goes in front. The rational and then the irrational. All right, that's how they do that. All right, it's really not that difficult. It's just a pattern going through the same process. All right. Now, what I want to do is, it could have been harder, and I want everybody to take a look at number 15. Actually, let's just go ahead and do 16 so I don't have to erase. All right. Now, the only reason I'm showing you 16 is because it can be harder. All right. The reason why it can be harder because if there's fractions involved. All right. Now, again, you guys should be pretty good at this, so let's take a look. Does anybody know what the first problem we have on question 16 is? What?
The 4 is the.
That's correct. It's called the leading coefficient. The leading coefficient is not a 1. So the leading coefficient must always be 1. So in order to do that, I would have to
Divide by 4.
I have to divide it through by 4 first. And when we do that, we end up with v squared plus 4v, leave a space, equals 65/4. Now, again, I always try to tell kids we're coming up on ERBs, we're trying to do a better job, we're trying to get even better scores than you got last year. So we need to make sure that you're good with your fractions. All right? So when you half and square, you're adding what? Adding 4, right? So you're adding 4. All right? So now it factored into what now? V plus 2 squared is equal to, now, 65 over 4 plus 4 is what?
69.
You guys, some of you are, we got a lot of reviewing to do.
Oh, I tried to go with this one. 16 over 4.
Yeah, because, listen, remember, in order to do this, you have to have common denominators, right? So 4 is the same as 16 fourths.
That's what I got. Yeah, that's what I got.
So now 65 plus 16 is, yes, there you go. Those of you guys who said 81, okay. All right, 81 over 4. All right, you're at 81 over 4. You have any questions with that now? All right, now you're taking the square root of both sides. So we have v plus 2 is equal to, plus or minus 9 halves. I heard you. 9 halves, thank you. All right. Everybody okay with that being v plus 2 equals plus or minus 9 halves? Remember, a fraction, when you take the square root, you're taking the square root of the numerator, and you're also taking the square root of the denominator. Any issues? Yes. All right. So now, let's see what we got. So v is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 9 over 2. All right, so we're not doing negative 2 plus 9. We would have to change that to v equals negative 4 over 2 plus or minus 9 over 2. All right, so now what is negative 4 plus 9? 5 over 2. So v is equal to 5 over 2 or negative 13 over 2. All right. So again, it's not that bad. All right. It's not that bad. All right. Again, the leading coefficient, if it's not a 1, you have to make it a 1 by dividing everything through. All right. Is everybody good on that? All right. Now, I'm going to show you question 19. Everybody take a look at 19. Let's see how much fun we can have on this one. All right, honestly, this is about as hard as it can get because the middle term, when you take half, doesn't divide evenly. All right? So, in this case, you can see what I mean. It's not that difficult, but we're practicing the fractions, so try to stay with me. So I have n squared plus 13n is equal to negative 15. Everybody good with that? Yeah. All right. Now, what I try to encourage kids is I don't care about the decimals. Fractions are much easier to work with. So if I take 13 and divide it by 2, all right, it's just leave it as 13 over 2. And then when you square that, 13 squared is 169, and 2 squared is 4. So we're adding 169 fourths. Please take a look at that. That's not that hard. All right? Now, the next part is it factors into whatever the half was. All right? So in this case, the half is what? 13 over 2 squared. Now, the hard part. Now, negative 15 is how many fourths? Negative 60. So now negative 60 plus 169. So we would say 109 over 4. We would say 109 over 4. Any questions with that? Now we're taking the square root of both sides. Square root of both sides. So n plus 13 over 2 is equal to, you should be okay with this, plus or minus the square root of 109 over 2. All right. Here we go, listen. How do I get half of 13 is what? 13 over 2, right? If it doesn't go evenly, just leave it as a fraction. All right? Now your final answer then you would say is n is equal to negative 13 plus or minus the square root of 109 all over 2. Now remember, how did I get that now? Because you're doing the fractions, correct?
Oh, yeah.
Right? And on the fractions, do you agree they already have common denominators?
Yeah.
Right? So you can put the numerators together over a single denominator. That's how they'd want you to do it. All right, is everybody with me?
Yeah.
All right. So again, honestly, for me right now, the hard part is if you're able to do some of those. All right, we got the fraction. All right, and that's what I want you to kind of practice a little bit tonight. So here's what I would like for you to do. I want everybody to circle 21 and 23. And then let's just finish up the odds. All right, that's not bad. Let's just do that. Let's do the odds. All right, everybody work on the odds.
So we don't need to do. That's how odds work. That's how odds work. Wait.
Well, I was going to do something different.
You can make it. Oh no, we can do that.
I was going to do something
We
different.
can. Why don't we just do 21?
So again, your job tonight is 1 through 23 odds.
Do we have to do the way that we learned today?
Yes. I know it's annoying. Sorry. All right, I normally don't ask you to do that. All right, I normally don't ask you to do that, but completing the square is really important. All right, so get busy on that, please.
So we don't have to do anything.